the x-axis. Okay? At that point, okay, wherever it crosses the x-axis, like it does here, the y value is always going to be 0. So again, on X-Intercepts, the y is always going to be 0. Let me put this out just a little. It is. I know. So, then, when we get the Y-intercept, which is where it's going to cross the y-axis, the one that goes up and down, okay, which kind of makes sense. If it's an intercept of y, it would cross the y-axis. At that point, the x value is always going to be 0. So whichever one it's not crossing, that value is going to end up being 0 for the other. And you'll get the hang of it just to kind of play with it a little bit. But this is going to make dealing with equations and stuff a whole lot easier. It's probably the easiest way to graph a line. Yes, sir? Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes you may have one going through 0, 0. That would be the one exception to the rule. Because otherwise you'll have one of each with what we're doing. So everything we're doing is going to be linear. So we always find where the line crosses y, and then we kind of identify things. So here's how this works. Where does this particular line cross the y-axis? Well, here's my y-axis. It crosses right here. The coordinates of that are 0 because my x value is always 0, and 2 because that's where my y is at. So as we do these, sometimes it's easy to see them and sometimes it's not going to be so much. So since here my y-intercept is at 0, 2, and again, whenever I'm doing a coordinate, remember I'm plotting a point, x comes first, y comes second. Okay? So as I do that down here, move this up just a bit. Try to zoom back in here a little bit. I know it's getting a little small. There we go. So identify the x-intercept and y-intercept from the graph. So here's our picture. Coordinate to the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, here's y. Okay, yeah, it looks like it's right here. So that point is 0, 2. But remember, the y-coordinate of that point is the 2. Okay? Well, let's see. When I look at the next one, because it's asking me to find where it crosses the x-axis. Now, I don't see a big point on this one. But I notice the line crosses right here. Okay, just by visually looking at it. So I'm like, well, here, I went to the right one, but I didn't go up or down any, so that point's 1, 0, right there. And my x-coordinate of that point is the 1. But basically, my x-intercept ended up being the same thing. Okay, it's still the coordinates of those points. So, whether I have a y-intercept, we could even say explain the meaning of intercept period. Exactly, okay. Line crosses the axis. And if it's the y-intercept, it's the y-axis, the up and down. If it's the x-axis, it's the one that goes side to side, it's horizontal. But that's our biggest thing right now. Oops, let me move that up a little. Is understanding x-intercept crosses the x-axis, y-intercept crosses y. Okay? So as we kind of get a little deeper into this, So now, identify the x and y-intercept of this line. We're going to scratch this part. Okay, where's my x-intercept at? Which one of those 2 points is my x-intercept? 4, 0. Because here is my x-axis, and this point's right on it. So my x-intercept is at 4, 0. Yeah, my y-intercept is the one that follows my vertical, or my up and down line. I don't know. I scratched that one. That time we don't need to explain. Yeah, you don't have to. Okay? So, stop. Okay? Now, let's say sometimes we get a table instead. Like, oh crap. Okay, we might not always get a picture. Sometimes we may get a table instead. So they'll give us my x and y values. Now here's where it gets a little trickier. Okay, my x-intercept, that may be a little harder to find. Because I look at this one, and I'm like, well, here's one with 0. My x value is 0. My x value is 0. That's the y-intercept. Okay? So when x equals 0, that's my y-intercept. Well, what do I do now? Since I don't have a 0 in here to be able to find my x-intercept. Well, what can I do? Here's what we're going to do. Since the y value equals 0, when it's the x-intercept, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take the equation they give me, and I'm going to plug in 0 for y, and I'll figure it out. So I'm going to have 0 equals negative 2x plus 2. I just took the equation and put the 0 in for y. So if I want to find x, if I want to solve for x, how do I get the plus 2 out of there first? Okay, we got to minus it for both sides. So what we're going to do, if I minus 2 from both sides, I have negative 2 equals negative 2x, and then we just divide by negative 2, and then x ends up being 1. And since we plugged in 0 for y, that's where that value would come from. So if they give me that expression, I can figure that part out if I need to. It doesn't end up being, too bad. Nothing too terribly awful. So let's see here. A little further down, what's the x-intercept? Okay, remember, the x-intercept is when y is 0. So look for the one where y is 0, and that's going to be where your intercept. Right, because, if my x-intercept is what I'm looking for, y is going to be 0. If it's the y-intercept that I'm looking for, it's my x value is going to be 0. So I find 0 for x on the chart, and that's going to end up being my y-intercept. So whatever intercept you're looking for, again, it's always just the other number is going to end up being 0. So I think, one more part here. We're going to learn a little bit about the graphing part. We're going to get a little bit deeper into this, just a bit. So here's our deal when we get to the back here. A couple of reminders. First, the y-axis is the one that goes up and down. If it's positive, we're going up. If it's negative, we're going down. Okay? I'm going to label these a little bit bigger. Then the x-axis goes left or right. If it's positive, I go to the right. If it's negative, I go to the left. So now, here's how this is going to work. Scooch this up just a bit with our reminders available. Whenever you get a graph, if they're not right away, I would label my x and y axis so I remember where everything goes. So here's how this is going to work. So graph the line with a slope of 2/3 and a y-intercept of -1. If they give you the intercept, you always want to graph that first. So if my y-intercept is -1, what direction am I going to go? 1. Down. So I go down 1, I put a point. Okay, that's my first step. And then right. Since my slope is 2/3, it would be. Because my number on top is my y value, which is always going to be up or down. So that top number means we go is up to, the number on the bottom is my right left, which is right 3. So from the point I already made at my intercept, I go up to right 3, make my second dot, and just connect the dots. Okay, hang on. When we get to 3, don't yell out stuff right away. There's some pieces to this that we want to take a look at. Same idea as it was in the last one. We're going to do the y-intercept first. Okay, here's my y-axis. If my y-intercept is +2, which way are we going to? Am I going up or down? It's okay. If my y-intercept is positive, I'm going to go up 2. Put a dot. Okay. My slope, if it's not a fraction, if it's a whole number, I always can make it a fraction by putting it over 1. You're like, now why would you want to do that? Here's why. If I just looked at this as -2, yeah, I'd see the down 2 part. I'd go down 2 and I'd want to put my dot, but that wouldn't be right. But since I use the 1, and again, I only do that if it's a whole number. So I'm going to go from here, I'm going to go down 2 and write 1. I'm going to graph that. You really need to keep this packet handy, because here's something I'll kind of remind you as we go forward. Okay? When we get to a quiz with the intercepts, you're going to be able to use this. Only if you have it, though. I'm not going to have sharing with other people. So you're like, okay, so now what comes next? Because you know how I've been lately. You're like, Hardy, there's always something else that you come with after that. So, let me pause this for a second. Let's make a couple of notes here up at the top. When we're trying to find the x-intercept and y-intercept of my equation, okay? When it's the x-intercept, we set y equal to 0. When it's the y-intercept, okay, we're going to set x equal to 0. Here's how this works, okay? I'm going to show you a way that'll keep life much simpler for you. If only you will let me do it. So, I'm going to make myself 2 separate little spots for this. And here's how this is going to work. since I'm putting 0 in for something. When you put in 0 for a variable, it kind of just disappears, right? Because adding 0 to something doesn't matter, subtracting doesn't matter. So here's what we're going to do. On every one of these equations, so if I'm looking for the x-intercept, and I know that y equals 0, doesn't that basically just mean that I can wipe the y out and pretend it's not there? So my x-intercept is just me rewriting the equation without the y there. In this case, that's kind of cool, because, well, x equals -9. I'm done already. Nice. So the actual intercept is -9, 0. Because I would put my x value first, my y value second. It would, because when I do y, the x equals 0. So I cover up the x. So the equation then looks like it becomes y equals -9. Y is already solved for. Y is already by itself. And since I always do x and then y, my y-intercept. Now, it won't always go quite that simple. You may have a step here, too. But again, the concept is always going to be the same. So, for instance, if I get there to number 2, remind myself that y equals 0, which means I cover up the y. So what do I see that's left in my equation? Well, I see 3x, and I see equals 6. Everything else stays the same. Yep, and my one step to get x alone is just to divide. I get x equals 2. So then when I go to make my point, x, y, I have my intercept. So the y-intercept, I plug in 0 for x, which even wipes out the 3, because if you multiply something by 0, it's gone. I'm like, okay, so y equals 6. Oh, good, that one's done already. X, y. Now, can I get decimals and stuff? That can happen. So if I bump up a little bit, let's say I get to 3. Same concept working. So x-intercept, y is going to be 0. So I cover up the y. I write what I see, which is -4x on the left equals 6. And my last step with these is always going to be to divide. And if you get a decimal, that's okay. So -1.5 in this case. My value then is my x, comma, y. Y-intercept, same deal. Cover up my x term. Y equals 6. Yep, and just divide. Y equals 2. And I say, okay, x, y. Not for a long while. Long while. Okay. Now, let me throw one more twist in on you here. One more twist. Number 5. Notice the x and the y are not on the same side this time. Now, this is just me. I like having x and y on the same side when I'm going to do these. So whenever they're not, I'm going to fix it so they are. So I'm going to add 2x and get it into a form that I like. So 2x, that's a positive y, equals -6. I could do this without doing it. But again, I want to keep this as normal as I can. Because now when I split them up, again, when I have my x-intercept, I cover up the y, I copy what I see. And if I have to solve for x, which in this case I do, let's finish that up. And again, x value and y value doesn't change. With my y-intercept, cover up the x, because that 0 makes it go away. Sweet, didn't even have to do anything. X, y. Okay? So that's what we're working on with these. We're working on finding the intercepts, because then when we go to grab it, we're just plotting 2 points and we're done. Not having to think about it a whole lot. Now, on the back, find the x-intercept and the y-intercept, then graph. Okay, show your work. So, for instance, intercept, intercept. And this is basically, again, this is just a way to organize yourself and get yourself on a roll. Okay, the extra 5 seconds I take to write out x int and y int isn't really taking me that long. So x-intercept, cover up the y. We work that out. What's my last step to get x alone then? Divide by -3. And again, when I go to make my point, it's x and then y. And we'll graph this in a minute, but for now I'm just going to solve. When I switch up, my y-intercept, x is 0, so the x part goes away. I copy what I see, divide both sides by 6, get my y value, and again, it's always x, y for my point. And then my only job left is to come over to my graph, get my x and my y-axis labeled. Okay, -6, 0. The -6 is my x value. So am I going to go right or left 6? Left 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. My x-intercept is always on my x-axis. Y-intercept is going to be on here. Up or down 3? Up. 1, 2, 3. As soon as I get those set, draw my line, I'm a happy camper. Let me help you get 10 and 11 set up the way 9 is, and then I'm going to leave you be here for a minute. For 10 and 11, let me help with some setup. We need x and y together. So since y is by itself already, we'll minus the x. So -1x plus y equals -4, and then I do it just like I did number 9. Do my x and my y-intercept. And the exact same thing on number 11. Again, I want x and y together. And then I split them into x and y intercepts and solve it that way. Okay? So as far as intercepts go, you've got everything then. You know your x and your y intercepts. You know, we can graph the points, and we'll get more into the graphing as we go along here too.